In this video we're going to connect to our ORM. I'm going to be using the Northwind database running under SQL Server for this demonstration. I've already gone ahead and created my Visual Studio project, which is just a standard WPF application, and now I'm going to create the code that's necessary for me to connect to the ORM and through that to Northwind. I'm going to right click on my project and say add new item. List of all the templates that I have installed on my copy of Visual Studio, which is quite a few, so I'm going to narrow down what I'm looking for by just typing Telerik data, and the one I'm after is the Telerik data access domain model. Now we're going to use the simplest use case, if you like, for connecting to an ORM. I probably would do it a little bit differently if I was connecting this up for a commercial application, but since we're learning, we'll keep it nice and simple and we'll actually add this domain model into our main project. Down the bottom it gives us a default name of Entity Model 1. I'm going to just change that to something a little bit more meaningful, so I'm going to call mine Northwind Model and click Add. This then starts up the Telerik Data Access wizard, and the first question it's going to ask us is, are we going to create a new empty domain model, in which case we're going to essentially create the database in Visual Studio using the Telerik Data Access tools and then have it generate the schema for our database, or are we going to work with an existing database, which is what we're doing in this particular example. So I'm going to leave the default populate from database. We have to choose a back end. By default Microsoft SQL Server is selected, but if you're using another database you'll have to select that from the list here. I'm happy with both those options, so I'll click next. Our next step is we need to connect to our physical database. Now if you've previously connected to it, then a list of the connection strings are available to you here. So you can see I've got Northwind available to me. But if it wasn't on that list, I'd have to click on Add New Connection and then go ahead and connect up to my database. Since I already have it listed, I'll leave it there. You can see the connection string that it generates, and it will create a app.config file in your project with the name Northwind Connection inside it. Click Next. It's just gone ahead and read all the tables, views and stored procedures and functions for our database. So if I expand the tables list here, you can see that we've got all the tables for Northwind. Now I'm only particularly interested in one table at the moment, which is customers, so I'm just going to select that one. It is worth noting, if you select all of them, then Data Access will go ahead and actually create the necessary code to work with all those tables, which may well be redundant for your particular application. So if you don't need to have all the tables selected, then my advice would be not to. You can always go back and rerun this wizard if you want to add more tables to your project. So I've selected customers in my particular case, which is all I want, and I'll click on Next. At this point you can decide if you'd like to change some of the default naming rules, properties and so forth that Telerik Data Access uses, and if you're a more advanced user this might be useful in some particular use cases, but generally speaking I think the defaults are absolutely fine. I've never personally had a need to change them, so I'm going to leave them alone and just go straight to finish and finish the wizard up. Okay, so Telerik's now gone ahead and generated the ORM code for me in my project. If this was the first time you'd run Telerik Data Access, you probably also would have got a security warning, which you can say OK to. And after that you'll get this dialog to say that if this is the first time this project has had any Telerik Data Access, which it is, then it'll be necessary to reload the project. This gives you a bit of a forewarning of that. The very next screen or dialog actually advises you to reload, so I'll do that, reload all. And we're done. Now again, if this is the first time that you've run through that wizard, you've never used the Telerik Data Access before, you'll also find a couple of new windows will appear in Visual Studio. I've gone ahead and docked mine. They're over here, so you'll get a Model Object Explorer and also a Model Schema Explorer. I'm not going to go into those for this particular introductory video, But when those windows appear in your project, you can dock them like I have, or you can close them for just a simple exercise like this one. Okay, let's go over and have a look at our object model that's been created for us. And we can see we have a customer object, and we can see the various fields that make it up, which are now properties. Sometimes, depending on the naming conventions of your original data source, it may be a case that Telerik will rename either the tables or perhaps the fields. So it is worthwhile just having a quick scan down that list to see if you're familiar with all those names, and if you're not, to acquaint yourself with them. They all look fine to me, so it looks like a pretty standard sort of translation there, no dramas. So I'm happy with that. And that's basically, I'm done at this point. I can go ahead and use the ORM. What I like to do, just to make doubly sure that everything's running smoothly, is just run a very basic query onto my Northwind database using the ORM to make sure the connection string's working fine and there aren't any security problems or what have you. So to do that, I'm going to go to my main window here, and I'm just going to create a bit of code that I'm going to have triggered by the load event. So let's go down to loaded, bring up the code window here, and maybe we might zoom that in a little bit so you can see it. Okay, so the code I'm going to use is just a straight connection, and I want my ORM to come back and tell me how many customers in total that I have in the database. I've previously queried the database in SQL Server, so I know there should be 91 of them. So I just want to check here basically that's indeed what I get. I'll type using, press tab twice. Now I have to put in the name of the model, which you recall I used was Northwind model. I'm creating an instance of it here, so I'm going to call my local instance DB. That's established the connection to the database, and indeed we'll close the connection to the database as soon as we finish our query. Now we're ready to actually write the query itself. So I'm going to display the output from the query in a message box, and I'm going to look at my customers table, and I want a count of all the customers, and because it's going to come back as a number and I'm using a message box here, I'll need to convert the result to a string. That's all I need for it. So let's run the query and see what we get. And over here is our answer of 91, which is the correct answer. So I know I've successfully got my ORM to work with my WPF application.